I think he was a report of record, so nobody can break it.
Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started here. Welcome to Kent City Council Workshop. We have one item on the agenda tonight. That's going to last about an hour or so. And Kaelene. And we're going to be talking about ADU. Glad to have you.
Glad to be here. Hello, Council.
Hi.
I can't remember if these are recorded. If not, if they are, I'm Kaelene Nobis, the Senior Planner with Economic and Community Development in the Long Range Department. And I'm here today for a workshop about accessory dwelling units. So we have a lot of material to cover today. So what I'm going to give you is kind of just an overview of kind of what I hope to achieve with this meeting today. And then we'll dive right in because we've got a lot of stuff. So the format of our meeting today is I'm going to have a little brief overview of what we've done with accessory dwelling units so far in Kent and our existing code, and introduce the consultants that we've hired. And then I will hand it over to our consultant. One of them is Matt Hutchins. He's an architect who's done a really thorough and awesome deep dive into Kent City Code. And he'll talk about some of the barriers to current ADU construction. And then I've grouped these barriers into essentially themes. And at the end of the presentation, I have a lot of time reserved for us to go one by one on each theme and have some time for discussion on each item with you as a council and get some policy direction. So, first things first, just some level setting. I know y'all probably know by now what an ADU is, but for those in the audience and on recording, an accessory dwelling unit is also referred to as a mother-in-law apartment or a casita, and they're self-contained residential units that are accessory to a single-family home. The basic needs of eating, sleeping, and sanitation need to be met in order for something to be an ADU or an accessory dwelling unit. And so that means a kitchen, a place to use the restroom and to shower or take a bath, and then somewhere to sleep. And there are many ways an accessory dwelling unit can look. All of the examples on this slide are work done by Cast Architecture, who is our architect for this project. But essentially in Kent, we allow attached or detached ADUs with different kind of design regulations attached to each one. So a little bit of background. Kent was actually one of the earlier cities to adopt accessory dwelling unit regulations. We did in 1995. But although we were an earlier adopter of ADUs, we have seen very few built in our city. When I did the permit poll to see how many total, it was like under 40 since 1995. And some of the stats we pulled out in K-HOP were less than 20 in the last 10 years. So we're seeing about the same trend of about 3 to 4 we get permitted a year. So we noticed this, and the first time we looked at accessory dwelling units was actually with the Kent Housing Options Plan in 2021. And we engaged with SOCIO, the South King Housing and Homelessness Partners, and we had a sub-regional collaborative effort to identify housing needs and ways to diversify housing opportunities. And accessory dwelling units were kind of identified sub-regionally as one of many potential avenues to diversify our housing stock. So knowing that information, when we did the Kent Housing Options Plan, it was a big push to ask about the residents and their willingness to see accessory dwelling units, and overwhelmingly 47% of our survey respondents, this was the type of housing they would be willing to see, similar only to townhomes in answers. Everything else kind of gets less frequent after that, but accessory dwelling units and townhomes were the two most popular. So we identified removing these barriers as a near-term high-priority implementation item in K-HOP in 2021. So this slide specifically is actually pulled directly from K-HOP, and you'll notice that most of the things that are on this slide, don't read it, we'll talk about pretty much all of it today, because that's the goal, right? We set this in motion in 2021 that we want to reduce barriers to ADUs. This was a preliminary research done by myself for the Kent Housing Options Plan, and much of it you'll be seeing come back to the surface today of the kinds of barriers that we're finding with accessory dwelling units. So where are we at so far? We got a grant for the Housing Action Plan implementation, or HAPPY grant, for $80,000 we got last year. That grant needs to be expended and our draft ordinance complete by June 15th, 2023. So that's why we're starting this kind of process with y'all now, and you'll see a lot of us upcoming to Land Use and Planning Board and ECDC over the next 6 months. We hired Burke Consulting and Cast Architecture, and we've done a code audit and an internal staff workshop to kind of get all of the staff that review accessory dwelling units on the same page of what the goals are, and to make sure that when items that cross the silos of the city boundaries, like, are more public works oriented, we have the public works director on, on that team. So that way, when these things come up in our discussions with you today, you can know that we have included public works even though they're not here today. And then CAST has done interviews with people who have tried to build ADUs or have built ADUs in Kent from the permit records we've pulled. And then, given what we hear from y'all today, we might make some tweaks, but we have an outreach survey ready to go that I'm ready to launch next week based off of any potential changes and feedback we get from y'all today. So the bulk and the meat of the presentation today is going to be from Matt Hutchins. Is that correct? Am I saying it right? Okay. And so I'm going to introduce him and then have him come and show you what he's found.
Kaelene?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you. For the ones that you talked to who tried to build them, was that to find out what stopped them, why they didn't build? Did they?
Yep. Because we were able to pull in our permit system, I can see who applied for planning permits, which is just the design, and then who consequently then came in for the construction permits. And of course, we noticed a drop off. There were quite a few people who did apply for the first phase of the permit, but then never actually built the ADU. So it was hard getting a hold of those people because they, architects applied or things changed, but yes.
And the ones that you did get a hold of, you'll be telling us results of that later on?
Matt's going to interweave into his presentation some of that feedback we've heard. There was a lot of it, but I do have a document of all of the notes that we could give you all later too if you'd like to see all of the results from everything.
All right, good evening. How are you guys doing?
Good, thank you, Matt.
Let's see, so I'm Matt Hutchins. I'm an architect. I've been designing backyard cottages for now almost 15 years. So my firm has done about 50 and that is, they range from really, really small to, almost 1,300 square feet. The people that live there, it could be a rental, it could be, kids boomeranging home, it could be built for their mother-in-law, it could be multi-generational. It serves a lot of needs, and what we've seen is these are really, really an important sort of aspect to add to the housing stock because they tend to be smaller households or marginalized, or in some ways, like this scale of house just fits a lot of households better than a kind of more traditional house. Let's see, so that's an example of one, just starting off. Let me go forward instead of backwards. So when we started off, we looked at all the permits that were pulled and all the permits that weren't completed. So you can see all the blue dots are where ADUs were built, and those could be they could be detached or detached. And then over on the right side, all those yellow dots, we decided that in order for any project to work, what we find is you kind of have to get really into the weeds and analyze what the neighborhood's like, what the typical sites are like, so you can understand what the like how easy, how feasible it is to use the existing zoning rules in order to build something. And so we picked a bunch of sort of typical sites from different neighborhoods and then did a bit of an analysis. So you can see we took, streets that had alleys, they had in cul-de-sacs, on corners, and then applied the current rules to see what the pinch points were, where we had trouble. And it could be where the entry had to be, it could be parking, it could be any number of things. And then we sort of compiled this with data as well for the neighborhood, just to get sort of a sense of why these aren't happening. Because in that last slide, you can see there was only 38 in the course of the last 2.5 decades. And that's not a very big, a big haul. You would think that there would be a lot more given the number of sites. And we can talk about exactly why there haven't been. So here's just another example from a different neighborhood. And so we're looking at, what would it look like if it was attached? What would it look like if it was detached? What are sort of the development pressures that would affect where it could be, how it would work? And is that a good outcome for the neighborhood, for the residents in the house and the residents in the accessory dwelling unit? Okay, so today we're going to talk about some of these barriers. One is just, in the form, and that can be the size, it can be height, it can be design guidelines, things that make it more difficult to build these. We're going to also talk about impact fees and their impact on any single development project, ownership, whether or not how the owner occupancy requirement has affected these, parking, and also quantity, whether adding the capacity for a second ADU or DADU would actually have a big impact. Okay, so a little bit, so just starting off, the current code limits the size of accessory dwelling units to either being 33% of the size of the house or 40% of the size of, 33% if it's a detached structure and 40% if it's part of the house or it's it's an addition. And so we took kind of a traditional sized house. This is actually a house that we just picked off of Google Street View. And then calculated what 33% of that house would be. And you can see it ends up being, even for a typical sized house in Kent, it ends up being essentially like a studio, a 1-bedroom, 1-bath. And if you think about who's going to live there and the homeowners that are making the decision to build this project, it kind of puts a ceiling on what they can do. It's not for a family. It's not going to be for, maybe it's for, one elder parent, but probably not a couple, And so it really limits who can live back there and also what a homeowner might be able to do with it if they're thinking about a long-term future and having flexibility. You can see that with attached ADUs where they're limited to 40%, the key there is that, if you can imagine a mother-in-law in the basement, that's 50% of usually a traditional, sort of rambler. So by having it be 40%, it just instantly creates some sort of, we have to actually carve a space out of the basement, for example, that isn't part of the unit. It can't, and so there's, if that were just 50%, if the DADU threshold was higher, it would open up a lot more possibilities. So this is just an example of what the sort of typical maximum build is today. So you can see that as these get a little bit bigger in increments, 800 square feet, that becomes then a 2-bedroom and a bath and a half, which would work for a couple, small family, and is a lot more flexible. There are lots of places in this region that allow 800 square foot cottages. There are a lot that allow the next increment up to 1,000 square feet. That allows for basically a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and you can see relative to the original house, which is 2,100 square feet, it still feels secondary.
Does it matter, you got the size of the house, but what about the lot? Do that play a role in this year too, or no?
It doesn't play a lot or it doesn't play a part in this, but you could imagine that some jurisdictions allow bigger lots, bigger ADUs.
Yeah.
But in your code, it isn't linked to lot size.
Okay.
And then as we get a little bit bigger, at 1,200 square feet, then you're getting into something that really is kind of a second family house, 3 bedrooms, bath and 3/4. And then it starts to also, based on the size of the lot, make sense to go to a second story and have a more compact footprint. And then you can also see then a 1,500 square foot version. And we're laying out these kind of options because you have some options to kind of make some decisions about where the right size for these cottages are. And so we're just trying to show you relative to kind of a current house and neighborhood structure what it's going to sort of feel like. One of the other limits with regards to form is that the roof pitches are supposed to match the original house. And you can imagine if you have, but then there's also, the height limit is at 23 feet, which is, it's difficult to really do a true two-story house in 23 feet. And if you have a house that has, if your current house has steep pitched roofs, it's going to be really, really hard to get a steep pitched roof on a little cottage and have a second story and get it under that height limit. Once it gets over 12 feet, there's also additional review that's required by the city. So the city has to review it for conformance. So you end up with these conditions where it's hard if you have, it's hard to build a 2-story house, which in this case would preserve more backyard if you could do something that's more compact. And also it's really hard to match the existing roof pitch. You can also imagine if you had a rambler with a really low sloped roof and then what you wanted to do was a 2-story cottage, then you would have, maybe a flat roof that didn't work with the design. It's a bit of an unnatural design constraint. What we found is just by adding a couple of feet, you can do, you don't have to rely on low ceiling heights and thin floor slabs and low slope rafters in order to build kind of a true 2-story. You can see relative to the height limit, it's not it's just a marginal increased impact, but it allows for a ton of flexibility. So you don't have to, frame. You can have the second story, all the walls can be full height, whereas if you have a 23-foot height limit, oftentimes what we would do is frame it with a 6-foot kind of perimeter wall and then slope up from there. The other thing that is in the current code is just that the design of any sort of detached accessory dwelling unit has to match the house. So if you've got vinyl siding, in theory you should have to put vinyl siding on your new cottage, or if you've got at a really expensive shingle style, something like that, you wouldn't be able to do something different on the cottage. And so having those two things linked is the impetus there is so that it feels it's I guess less. It doesn't jump out as much relative to neighbors' houses, but I think what we've found is that these are visually, because they're in the backyard, the impact is most of the time you can't see it from the street. It's really just who your two neighbors are, and more often than not, in the 50 or so that we've done, the neighbor wants to build a backyard cottage too. It's not that they see it go up and they're like, wow. They're not like, oh my God, what'd you do to my backyard? So we often find that the negative impact is a little bit is probably overdone, and it's really that I think if you're going to be making this investment, having some flexibility and having some freedom goes a long way. I'm showing this diagram. This is This is using the two-car garage that is prevalent in a lot of houses as the attached accessory dwelling unit. Doing a garage conversion, which is right now somewhat difficult because of both building code and zoning code. Converting, you have to be able to find those parking spaces somewhere else on site. But this is absolutely the least expensive method to provide new housing. And as we'll see in other maps, this opportunity exists on almost every house in Kent, whereas there are lots of other factors that limit the number of places that we can build an accessory dwelling unit.
In this example, this is an attached one, right?
It's an attached one. It's as if you converted the garage, instead, took out the garage doors, put in a front door, put in some windows, and turned that into an apartment. It's already separated from the house by the fire separation because you have that between garages and living space. And it's also usually where you have access to the power, access to water, and it's near the front. And also, access is quite easy. And because it's, there's always, a really simple break between the garage and the house, it's really easy to achieve fire separation. So as opposed to like doing something in the basement where you have, potentially if you're trying to rent that out, you've got a renter in your basement. This is a nice, clean, bright line. It's a really sensible way to convert one house into two households.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, right. Sorry, just, got excited. Okay, so building and permit fees. This is kind of a profile of what Kent charges today or charged in 2022 for a $300,000 DADU. You can see it adds up. Building permit fee, school impact fee, transportation, fire, water meter, building permit, it's about $20,000. So, and that's pretty, that's a lot for something that is ostensibly to provide kind of an alternative kind of housing. So it's not cheap, and relative to some other jurisdictions, you can see on the left, there's kind of Kent's stack of impact fees, and other jurisdictions are doing more to create an incentive by waiving fees, and you can see the blue areas below the black line. That's the value of fees waived in some of these other places. Maple Valley, Everett, Renton, you can see they end up just charging for the permit fee. That has a huge impact when you're a homeowner and you're just looking to provide maybe a house for aging mom, and suddenly there's a fair pretty large fee up front that's hard to finance. You kind of have to pay that in cash up front.
What's the average price of ADU?
They're going to vary, but like a detached accessory dwelling unit, it could be $200,000, $300,000. So.
I was thinking a lot smaller than that. They're not cheap.
No, they're not cheap. You should not think about this as affordable housing. This is less expensive housing than anything else in the neighborhood. You're not going to be able to find a 2-bedroom house except for a backyard cottage for $200,000.
Okay.
Owner occupancy requirements. What we've found is that by having these covenants, there are a lot of strings attached. They require the owner to live on site. They provide kind of it's unclear how they work with condominium law, which condominium ground those are allowed by state. So in Seattle, for example, we do have a lot of houses that build a backyard cottage and then create a condominium association with 2 owners, one for the house and one for the cottage. They're both owners, and it's a little unclear how it works with the owner occupancy requirements. One interviewee that we had, he had built an ADU and then ran into the owner occupancy requirement and was so kind of freaked out by it that he actually is living in another property and not renting out the house, not renting out the ADU at all because he's afraid that, you know, like, oh, what happens if I want to move? I was going to move, he was going to go down to Arizona, you know, and then he suddenly is running afoul of the law because he's not there and he has a renter in the ADU. So it creates a headache for people who are looking to build these for themselves. We talked to to Habitat for Humanity. They're developing properties with accessory dwelling units in other jurisdictions, but with owner occupancy, they're not going to do it because it messes with their financing, messes with their ownership model, and it's more strings. And ultimately, it affects the home sales, it affects appraisers, and it makes just the whole process a little riskier. Let's see. You recognize those two site plans coming back to parking? You know, with the 2 garage spaces and the 2 spaces in the driveway, Kent already essentially kind of prescribes 4 parking spaces. With an accessory dwelling unit, you have to have a 5th parking space. You can imagine on cul-de-sacs, where do you put that extra parking space? That's a big chunk of your front yard. Or on corner lots, you can imagine that if your house is in the back, the parking space, because you only allow 1 curb cut, the parking spaces are around the corner and adjacent to you know, essentially your neighbor's house. This is what we thought was the original issue, but then as we looked deeper into it, it turns out, no, we can't even do that because of the 20-foot wide curb cut minimum. So neither of these properties, we'd be able to get in and get a car parked in the available curb cut. So these 2 properties couldn't have an ADU currently.
Yeah.
What does that look like citywide? Here's that same sort of, you know, everything in red or in orange is a site that we don't think could support an ADU purely because of parking. That's 86% of the lots are wiped off the table. There's those ones that aren't colored in, those are the ones where there's enough space, there's enough access to be able to accommodate an ADU.
Real quick, I'm sorry, Councilman Wilmer.
Yeah, I think I've asked this question before, but I'd just like to revisit it again. In the scenario of if I have 2 teenagers in my house, we could literally have 4 cars, but they're going to park 2 of them on the street. But if I have an ADU and my mother-in-law's living there, I have to have a parking spot for her car.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's just nonsensical to me.
Yeah, it certainly adds up. There's only so much space. Yeah, here's another neighborhood. Here, 92% of the lots, or the area, are off limits purely because of the parking requirement. If we allow a second curb cut, that allows some of those, you know, corner lots to have a separate parking space that is, you know, that goes directly to that detached accessory dwelling unit. Let's see, and I think this is the last issue, it's just the number of ADUs per parcel. Other jurisdictions like Burien, Kirkland, Seattle, the whole state of California allow 2 accessory dwelling units. They can be 1 attached, 1 detached. I don't think anyone allows 2 detached, or they can be all 3 attached. But there's a lot of concern about, like, well, what is that going to mean? And so I pulled an example from Seattle. This is on a 5,000 square foot lot where we have that blue house is an accessory dwelling unit, and then the house in front has a basement apartment, the greenhouse, and they share this land pretty comfortably. They have like a shared backyard, and you can see there's plenty of space, and they're not, you know, crunched up against each other. And then I also added one more. This is one for that's happening currently. It's in construction, where we're rehabbing a house. So we're taking a house that was kind of, you know, was old and tired. We're renovating it. We're adding an accessory dwelling unit, and then building a backyard cottage in the back. And that too ends up having, and this is, sorry for the architectural drawing, but everyone has their own backyard because the orientation of the 3 units. And so this allows us to not displace anyone, provide two more rental units, and that is a great wealth building vehicle for this family. Okay. Now, turn the mic back over.
I was like, okay, so y'all take a couple deep breaths because that was a lot, right? So the best part about having Matt is that I can have him come and tell you all the architecty things, and then I can come in here and I can be like, okay, so now let's talk policy direction. And so that's what we're gonna do. And we're gonna talk about what of these options and everything that Matt has discussed is the right size, right fit for us. So I saw some of y'all faces, look like you might be a little scared, but I need you to know the breadth of all the things that are on the table so that then we can make sure that we make the right choices for us. So, we all good? So the first thing that I want to discuss with y'all is the size limits. And I guess what I'm envisioning kind of this to be is I have a little placeholder slide for each of the 5 main themes. And I want to hear your feedback. I want to hear which of those things that you saw from Matt that you liked, which things are like, whoa, hold up. And if you have any specific ideas for potential policy direction for me to take as staff. Because, for example, for the size limits and the draft I've written in the survey right now has a question where I don't think the members of the public really understand what the size of a square footage really equates to for bedrooms. And so the question is written more along the lines of, you know, what sizes would you be willing to see? 600 square feet equals 1 studio. 800 square feet equals 1 bedroom. And so that's kind of how I'm starting to phrase the questions for the survey. So knowing kind of where your minimums are and your maximums are really helps me to make sure that we are gearing the survey in a way that we're getting the best feedback possible from the public. So given that, I'll turn this one over to you.
And before you go there with that, I'm just curious, we got, what, 28 or so that exist in Kent today, ADUs?
Total, will look like a little under 40.
Under 40. Permitted. How many are actually built and people living in? Do we know that?
That was like 20.
I would not
Was it
be,
20 was it-
you are, yeah, I wouldn't, oh, go ahead.
What, 28 number? I saw 28 something. Did I miss?
28 was, we knew were permitted.
That's what I thought.
For
There
the,
were 38 that were completed.
Okay,
17 started the process and didn't get to a permit.
okay, gotcha.
There's also a lot that are unpermitted, so you may be experiencing consequences of groups that have not followed our code, and you're getting some of the overflow effects as well.
I guess the reason why I'm asking, because I mean, you got people living in those, right? It'll be nice if you can go and survey those people and find out what do they like about the ADU, what could be improved upon, because I think they would be the subject matter expert living in those, so I'm assuming he didn't do that, so that's fine. But it would be nice to kind of just hear about the existing people, what they think about the ADU for its improvement and so on. So I'm just throwing it out there. Not that you need to do anything, but just another data point. So let's start discussion here. We'll start with Councilmember Michaud, please.
Thank you, Council President. Okay, so as far as size limits, after hearing from Matt, it sounds like it would make more sense that if the attached ADUs, which could be a basement conversion or the garage.
At level, you know, I would love to build out for my mother-in-law my basement, so 50%, that seems like a pretty easy one for me for the attached. In theory, I agree with not wanting to build to the, like a 0 lot line, but in reality, homes are built that way today. So I kind of have a hard time saying that, you know, to limit it to the lot size, because we don't even see that in new construction. You can reach out your window and touch another window in the way homes are built today. So, I feel like I'd need to put a little bit more thought into it. I think the square footage, you know, bigger than what we have makes sense. It needs to be, I think, at least livable. So I think that was like the 800 was what the accommodated for one bedroom or 2 bedroom, 1.5 bath. I mean, to me, that just feels like that's in the range of what I would consider an accessory dwelling unit versus splitting a lot and building another house.
It's like the size of a studio apartment, right? Most studio is about
That's larger than a studio.
400 or even smaller. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you,
My
Councilmember.
first house was three-bedroom, 925
wow.
square foot house.
Makes you want to see council president's house, doesn't
With a family room, a living room, and a kitchen, so.
And one of the, one of the attachments you have, Mayor and I had a discussion a couple weeks ago, and she asked me to put together the table that I gave y'all. And that is something I hadn't mentioned yet, but I just remembered I gave it to you. So this is the Peer Cities Community ADU matrix that we've put together. The first page is what other cities around us who've adopted new codes since 2018 have done. There's kind of, I think, a general bit of best practices here. We're seeing around 800 to 1,000 square feet, not tying it to the size of the main home, kind of just as a general what most of them are doing. Renton does still tie it to the size of the main home, but doesn't limit it so severely. It's not 33%, it's 75. That's what the first page is. The second page are the other cities that haven't updated their code, that are more in line with where ours is now. And so kind of I think the way that we were looking at staff was whether or not we should still try to correlate it to the main home. Essentially, if your main home's 2,000 square feet, only 75% of that could be your detached, and whether or not there's pros and cons to that. And then, or having like a standard size number and being like, if you have a detached ADU, we could also, Renton does do it to lot sizes. I'm gonna just fudge the numbers here for you, but it's like a 5,000 square foot lot can have a 600 square foot ADU. A 10,000 square foot lot can have an 800 square foot ADU, and it's flat.
Kaelene, the Renton 75% of primary residence, is that attached or detached?
Attached.
Attached. Okay. Yeah, I'm okay with the 50%, but for detached, it makes sense to have at least 800. I think I like Renton's model more, but I'm not comfortable with, I don't know, depending on, I guess it would depend on the neighborhood and the house and how much backyard they have, right? So they can potentially try to build 1,000 square foot detached ADU and not have any space left. I don't know how that's even, I can't comprehend that, so. Or is that
Yeah,
gonna be
one of the other things is also to remember that there are other development regulations as well, too. So we're not currently right now proposing to significantly change. Well, we're not going to change the maximum impervious of a site or the buildable area of a site. Those two things are still remaining the way they are. So maximum impervious in single-family neighborhoods is essentially anything that covers the ground, so all your pavement, all your buildings, ranges from 60 to 70% depending on the zone. And then the maximum building footprints, which would be the main home and the accessory dwelling unit, is about 50% in most zones. And so they are still technically scaled to the lot in that manner. And so I think it's important to realize that 1,000 would technically still be unachievable for a lot of the really smaller sites because they're going to have the other development constraints like their setbacks, the maximum impervious and the maximum building footprint coverage. And then we also have a portion of the code about the maximum size of accessory buildings. So we get to choose whether or not we pull this out of that section or not. Currently, it exists in that section, and we correlate that to lot size as well.
Councilman.
Yeah.
Jump in. So for context, that several of the examples were 1,200 square feet that I showed.
That's big.
Like much bigger. It's quite difficult. Oh,
Sorry, because recording.
Yeah, sure.
We need to do
Here, let me borrow that. So, for context, that blue house is 1,250 square feet. And that just barely does a 3-bedroom in there. So I just wanted to, and I think it's really important to think about how big houses were when we grew up. Mayor, your example of having a full house, 3 bedrooms and 950 square feet, it's certainly a really effective housing form. You weren't damaged by living in a sub 1,000 square foot house.
Jury's still out on that. The jury's still out on that, but that's okay.
I think it has more to do with the flexibility. Once you get to 800 and to 1,000, then you have space for that second and that third bedroom. It's really important for families.
Well, these mostly designed for, like you say, mother-in-law type places, right?
Yeah.
Primary, right? I mean, do a mother-in-law need 3 bedrooms?
But there's nothing that says
I
it's
know.
mother-in-law. It could be a family.
Family,
of 6.
yeah.
It really depends. So our clients, for the ones that we do, sorry.
Just stay up there, okay?
Yeah. It really depends. Our clients tend to look at these for a variety of uses. So it might be that they are building it to rent for 10 years, and they're going to pay off the construction loan with that rental, and then their kids are going to go to college, and they're going to move into it, and then they're going to retire somewhere else, and their kid is going to move into it. And so having that, or we have retirees who are like renting their main house and moving into the back house. We have families that are 2 generations where there's the family and then the grandparents live in the ADU, and so it's just a couple. So it really depends.
Okay. Councilmember Fincher?
Thank you. I would be fine with the 1,000 square feet. I don't want to see another full-size house back there. And as far as the yard, as long as they still have the pervious ground, because you don't want to cause flooding by having a bunch of pavement there, I would be fine. Not everybody wants to do yard work, so if they want to cut down on some of that, I would leave that decision to them as long as they're still following the rest of the guidelines, which leaves the rest of the neighborhood safe also.
So you're 1,000 for attached, or detached is 1,000 period, what you're saying? Doesn't matter where it's attached?
I would think that would be fine, because you're going to have, I don't want it limited by lot size, but I want those guidelines, I think, would be the ones to help limit it. Is there space or not?
Okay.
That way, instead of saying you can only do this many square feet on this.
Okay. Councilmember Michelle?
Thank you, Council President. As far as the detached ones and the square footage, the mayor did kind of bring up a good point that the larger that we get, the more people we could have living in there, and that has a greater impact on the neighborhood and that sort of thing. So I think that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, totally agree. Councilmember Lummer, more questions?
Oh, sorry, no, that was from earlier.
So size, Kaelene, you got any feel from, we got you all over the place, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it. I'm taking lots of notes. You can see, look at
Okay.
this.
I think, so the maximum size, I think we kind of,
We can move on to the next one?
yes, ma'am.
We've got a few, and guys, I put the lower hanging fruit that I thought would be easier first, so buckle in, okay? I also want to be cognizant of your time. We booked you for an hour. I know that technically we could go an hour and a half, but, so I'll keep an eye on the time,
Yep.
Councilmember Boyce, and then you as well. We can cut this if we need to. So the next is height. I think what I'll do is probably just kind of let you guys know the direction we were thinking of going, and then if it's easier for you all to be like, cool, Kaelene, that's great, keep going, or if you're counter to it, let me know. So given some of the context that Matt brought to the table, we were looking at kind of 2 general policy directions. One of which is just to remove the correlation to the main home. This thing right now we have says if you cannot have an accessory dwelling unit that's taller than your main house. And then we have the 23-foot height, so increasing the height to 25, and or removing that correlation to the main house. But if you all still want to see a correlation to the main house, there is a way to do that as well, because I'm hearing a concern for the idea of looming structures in the backyard. Cities like Kirkland will say you can have it no taller than like 5 feet from the main house. So if your main house is like 15 feet tall, we could look into code to have, ADUs can be max 20 or something like that. So essentially we want to loosen this up a little bit because we know that it's too strict. And we can go all the way and just say no additional height limit for the ADUs, or we could correlate it to the main house in like a 5 to 10 foot range.
Well, personally, I would not want it taller than the main house. That seems so weird, because I got a neighbor across the street, and you got this big thing sitting in the back, right? It doesn't seem right, so I personally would not want to see it taller than the main house. But that's just my thoughts. Councilmember Michelle?
Thank you, Council President. I have strong feelings about this. I don't want it taller than the main house.
Okay.
Because if my neighbor builds one taller than their main house, then it will block my view of the mountain or whatever. So that's how I feel about that.
Any other? Yes, I'm sorry. Councilmember Fincher?
Yeah, I would go the 5 feet, because one of the examples you gave is that they have to have lower roofs, and it affected the building, which to me, maybe it's not, but it made it seem like the house wouldn't be as safe.
It has a lot to do. It certainly can affect the livability, like if you are doing a second floor, if you have enough space up there, to be able to make that work. If it's a carriage house where you've got a garage underneath it, and then you keep the second story really low, it makes it kind of ineffectual to build that apartment, altogether. So it does have a big impact.
Okay. Councilmember Lumber?
I agree. I think, it needs to stay within sort of like the flavor of the neighborhood. So if it's a single-story neighborhood, it's, I'd be okay with the 5 to 10 feet, because I don't know that would visibly be that impactful, but it would give you a little bit more, it sounds like, construction flexibility, so.
Just as long as it's not taller than the house, all right?
Not very much.
Councilmember Core?
I think that it should be about the same as the main house, but I'm comfortable with going 5 above as well. But I really like the idea of, looking, how the whole neighborhood and the house is, and it just kind of standing out, being taller, but I'm okay either way on this one.
And I think from a neighbor perspective, too, you want to think about your neighbors, too, right? So I'm across the street, and you got a house here, and then another house this tall here. I just think it just doesn't quite fit, so, but.
And if I want to offer one piece I think that I missed, just to explain where this is coming from a little bit more too, is that a lot of our housing stock was built pre-1960, in which the standard ceiling height and roof height of those structures is less than what the common construction height is today. And so we do have ramblers that are about 12 to 13 feet tall, and new single-story construction can be about 15 feet tall. And so something to keep in mind when considering if the correlation is something you want to look into, instead of the only making it fit the main height. And that's a piece that I should have brought up as well.
And the people living in the ramblers today, I'm assuming they comfortable in the ramblers today too, right?
Yeah, they just don't, we commonly don't construct buildings in that manner anymore.
Got it.
The materials to make roofs and stuff are everything's a little bit bigger now than it was with that housing stock.
But I think if we go with a slight increase just to accommodate modern building standards, to make it, we don't want to make these, we're trying to remove barriers, and if that would increase costs of construction to build in a way that's not standard today. That's why I think I can support a little bit of easement there.
Matt, you got a comment?
Yeah, one wrinkle by connecting the detached cottage to the house is if you have any sort of topography, it's, this might work if it's a flat site, but if you have a slight uphill pitch, then you may, just by the nature of your site, have eliminated the ability to build a backyard cottage. So that's another sort of concern is that it can eliminate that capacity pretty quickly if you've got.
Can we include policy language to address that lot?
Other cities do that.
Okay.
I think that's some of the research, I think, why a lot of the cities have the scaling component is just because of that. Yeah, where it's, that's where the language that I pulled from Kirkland was about the topography for the 5 feet.
Okay. Madam Mayor, you got a quick?
So I think that you may have just clarified this, but in keeping with what I'm hearing is about keeping to the feeling of the neighborhood and within scale. So if you had a slope, the house, if it was still the same height as the main house, even though it was higher on a slope, you're still talking about this physical structure. You're not talking about the height of the foundation, where the foundation is, right? I'm seeing like head nodding. So then it doesn't feel so out of scale. But if you have a 12-foot house and a 25-foot ADU, that feels super out of scale and blocks out
Yeah.
daylight.
Yep. Okay,
I was like, that makes sense to me.
all right, let's move on to the next one.
This one was about design guidelines, just under current code, the ADU must match, including siding and trim, and the roof pitch must match. And so generally, we're seeing cities continuing to retain design guidelines for aesthetics and prohibited materials, but being less specific on the matching. Another city I talked to on the phone, her words specifically were, be careful what you wish for, because think of the not nicest house in your neighborhood and needing to match that. And that was something that was eye-opening to me. I hadn't thought of it that way before. And so making sure that we're also not prohibiting essentially better materials than what exists out there. I don't think we would do that, to be honest, if someone came in and had a better material, but we would look at currently we would look at the color and the roof pitch and everything and make sure it matched. So the direction on this from you all would be if you like keeping it the way it is, where they need to match, or if you're in favor of staff proposing some different kind of overall aesthetic guidelines and list of prohibited materials.
Well, since we all agree that we can't see it from the road, so I don't really care, right? But, all right, we'll go with Councilman Lawmer, then Councilman Michelle, please.
Yeah, I think the matching too, like, I mean, in my neighborhood, it's an older neighborhood, so two of my neighbors have just torn down all their siding and are re-siding in a much more modern way. So I feel like if you match it, like, you're setting yourself up for failure almost.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Cool, easy.
Councilman Michelle, real quick.
Yes, if it's attached, it should probably match the outside. That's gonna be weird.
Fair points well made.
Detached, yeah, we have more modern styles now. The roof pitches don't need to match. Yeah, I agree with that.
And Councilman McCoy, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. With attached, it should sort of look like the house. Detached, I don't really care, but just out of curiosity, looking at the chart here, most of these jurisdictions have matching provisions, so maybe they're looking to change that, or?
I worked in two of the provisions in these jurisdictions, and what we considered matching was very loose. So some of this was subject to staff guidance through the years as things changed, and so I think some of this may be asking you all, I'll come to the mic. How literal do you want the code to be written, so it's exact match or a close approximation to blend in with existing
Close
development?
approximation.
I don't even know that I want it to any, like, blend in per se,
Well,
sitting
attached.
behind, or attached, yeah.
Council, I'm sorry, you're not a council member. Madam
It's,
Mayor.
I'll take whatever. Just for clarification, attached is a conversion of existing space. We're not talking about additions.
Technically, someone could do an addition,
Because there's
but
different rules that apply to additions.
we would look at that. So this matchy provision is for detached ADUs.
Right, so that's,
Yeah.
I just
So, I
want to
mean,
make sure we're
if
not.
someone were to come in and do an addition to their house, they would need to finish their siding, because you think about it, it's within a single-family structure that has single-family design review. And so there's a separate design review for single-family design review than there is for accessory dwelling units. And so we would look at attached one through the lens of a single-family design review, which there's nothing to match because it's just like, it's one whole structure.
Right, so that's.
All right, let's go to the next one, please.
Yes. Fees. So in our current code, we assess at the full rate permit fees, school impact fees, which for this year are zero, but for most school districts, but not guaranteed to be zero into the future. a water connection and a transportation impact fee. We've already set precedent in other departments. The fire department waives their fee at 1/3, and the parks new impact fees waive ADUs entirely. And so the policy direction we're looking at is either to whether or not we should reduce fees similar to how fire does, or parks where we look at waiving it to 1/3. Some other jurisdictions waive the fees entirely because they consider that if this truly is subordinate to a single-family home, the fees should have been paid with the single-family home. And then lastly, for the water meter, we have a mandatory water connection, which is about $8,000. Other cities make this optional. Or essentially you can choose if the 2 units are going to share a water meter and then save that $8,000. If it truly is for your mother in the backyard, you're not going to be billing her for her water, versus if you are going to be renting it out, you could pay the $8,000, put in the separate meter. And so the policy direction we were thinking about going here is to make the water meter optional, put that on the onus of the applicant and the owner, and then considering waiving impact fees.
I would say for the water meter, we can make that optional, and I would prefer just eliminating the impact fee. I mean, we're trying to, yes, for mother-in-law, but also could be for renters, right? And we're trying to keep the cost down as much as possible. So that's just my 2 cents. I don't know, council members, where you guys at? Okay.
I agree.
Councilmember Michelle?
I agree with the water meter part. I don't know about the impact fee.
We'd already paid it once, right? And let's go to the school, right?
Well, not just schools, but parks. Yeah.
So why should they get more? I mean, you already built the home. They already got the impact fee. Just gonna add another portion. They get
Because you could be adding more people
more people.
to live in the,
But what they got to do with the impact fee? I mean,
well, that's the point of the impact fee.
okay, Councilmember Core.
Could be adding more kids to the school district, potentially,
Yeah.
and fire issues, I mean,
Okay.
We do not charge an impact fee for additions. Not to sway you either way, but just because I realize this, if someone were to do 1,000 square foot addition, that essentially is also more of a fire or anything. For a single family home, that fee has already been assessed.
Yeah.
So we could look at dividing it up too between attached versus detached.
What do you say, Councilmember Core? I didn't hear you.
I'm okay with eliminating it,
Okay.
depending on, staff guidance, I guess I'm okay with that.
Councilmember Fincher?
I'd either eliminate it or go with what Kaelene said. That's what I was thinking about doing, is for that large 1,200, because you could move an entire family in there. So the larger ones, put the fee on that one, or
Reduce it?
altogether, yes.
Will you be willing to reduce it for the large one and 0 for the smaller ones?
I would be willing to reduce it for the larger one, 0 for the smaller one.
Councilmember Lumber?
I'd be willing to do the reduction for the larger and 0 on the smaller.
Okay.
Or I'd be willing to do 0 just because we have a housing crisis and we
Yeah.
need to look at ways to remove barriers to.
That's where I'm at. Yeah, that's where I'm at, so.
All right.
Hey, got some options there?
Yes, I've got
right.
lots of notes.
Do you need another pen or what?
No, I haven't. Hey,
All right.
Graham. Okay, let's go.
Hey, all right, let's do it.
We are almost there, y'all. This one, I think, actually, taking guidance from what I've heard from y'all, we currently do not have anything that prohibits condominiums for these, as Matt explained, just with how condominium law works. And we do have a covenant requiring owner occupancy on these. That is incredibly unenforceable. It's very difficult to enforce. And I know from coming to y'all in the past that you really don't like me to tell you things that we're doing that we can't enforce. So my suggestion for this would be to remove our owner occupancy requirement, and then just to clarify in our code the connection with condominium law. I think it might be rare that these would be condominiumized, but so that the public would know that they could potentially do that.
I would say yes, but got 2 yes, 3 yeses. Councilmember Fincher? Okay, done.
Yep, this is the big one, guys. All right,
Hey,
parking, ready. So Current code, we are technically out of compliance with our current code, just to let y'all know. There is state law on the books that says we cannot require a parking stall unless within a quarter mile of major, or within a quarter mile of major transit. So we do need to do this. So we will be adding this, no parking within a quarter mile of major transit during this code audit, just to keep us up with state law. But under our current code, as we've learned earlier, the garages do not count towards the parking stalls. So what we've looked at is we are thinking that we should allow the garage to count towards parking, which will not help in the instances that someone is doing a garage conversion, but that we should still require a parking stall, but have a list of options in Kent City Code of methods that would be more flexible, and we're working with the Public Works Department on what instances in which maybe a wider curb cut might be a possibility, or having 2 curb cuts if there's a larger site, or kind of a list of menu options of when we would be willing to waive parking. And it would be specifically tied to the neighborhood they're located in and the availability of on-street parking. But it essentially would be kind of I haven't written it out yet, but a tiered list of options of you have a parking stall required until you can prove these things.
So we don't want a bunch of cars parked on the street, though. I mean, I don't think so. You've seen some neighborhood you got the cars.
Happens already, though.
I know. Do we want more? Don't mean it's right. We don't need to encourage more, right? You just can't even go. And sometimes the fire truck can't even get down some of those streets. So that'll be my concern. But I'll be willing to listen to my council member. Councilman Lamar, your light's still lit up, so be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of goes back to my earlier question. The logic of needing my mother-in-law to have a parking place, but I kept 2 teenagers parking their cars on the street. So just logically, it doesn't make sense to me, but I would be open to something like you're talking about, a list of some of the streets we saw in Public Works yesterday where they're 24 inches wide. No, I think that's something like we can't be encouraging street parking on those narrow streets. So I think that there are some conditions we can put on that. I'd like to see us eliminate as many barriers as we can on parking, because I think it is the #1 barrier. But if in the majority of cases we're allowing it, I'd be okay with a list of different conditions.
Councilmember Kaur?
Yeah, I'm okay with the list of different conditions as well, and I was just going to point out, we are making more and more streets as no parking or, on parking on one side only. So I think we will have to look at this and figure out where actually people are going to park if they have cars. So, yeah, I'm comfortable with the list.
Thank you. Councilmember Michaud?
I agree with Council President Boyce. I'm okay with allowing the garage to count as stalls, but I do get a lot of complaints about how many cars are parked on the street, and I get people asking, can we make an ordinance saying people can only own so many cars and that sort of thing, so it is a big issue.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, all righty.
All right, and then this is the last one. So we've included this because, as y'all, I know many of y'all are aware what's happening in legislative session right now, and I just wanted to make sure that we kind of have this conversation so we know where we stand as a council about more than one accessory dwelling unit. And staff actually does have some concerns about this for all of the reasons we've discussed, and how much it changes. Like, okay, well, we've just been okay with doing all of this for one ADU. Now what happens if we allow 2? And so I'm interested in hearing if there are any circumstances in which y'all would be interested in allowing 2 per lot, or if we're going to stick with 1.
Councilmember Kaur?
Thank you, Council President. I'm actually comfortable with 1, but I know that there are a lot of homes in Kent that are older and they have a lot more square footage. So there is a possibility of allowing 2 in some places. And we are in a housing crisis, so I am okay with having 2 with some restrictions, maybe. I think that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Michelle?
Yes, so I'm okay with having 1 attached and 1 detached. But but I think one detached is enough. There aren't many homes left that have a lot of land that can have more than one, I would think, left here in Kent.
Okay, Councilman Fincher?
They would have to have a large enough lot,
Yeah.
in which case I would go for 2. But if it's a small, average-sized lot, I don't see how you could
Squeeze.
feasibly get 2 in there without having them breathing on each other.
So what we're telling I'm here, it depends on the lot size, is what I'm
Yes.
hearing? So it depends on the lot
Yeah, that
size.
makes sense, and we can look at that too, and there's, I mean, we do have quite a few places in Kent that do still have large enough lot sizes, where, you know, that might be appropriate.
I actually did have a lot owner with a very large lot ask me if, you know, if we were moving towards having 2. They were interested in doing 2, and,
Yeah.
you know, their lot could easily accommodate.
I
it.
think
There's
it-
not many of
Yeah,
them,
I
but,
think it's big enough, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
more power, people get places to live, so yeah. Then you get back to the parking too, right? So, you know,
That was good, so,
we'll be parking on top of each other's cars, right? So,
thinking
yeah.
about that decision, what, does it change the comfort level on parking? If you're gonna have 2 on a house, on a property, so then that's potentially 3 families living on a lot. Does that change where you all landed on parking?
There's so few lots left in Kent.
And
that
I think
way.
maybe there's some questions about, like, is it a 5,000 square foot lot or is it a 10,000 square foot lot? And
Yeah.
what does that, but then the 10,000 square foot lot is in a neighborhood with a small street because it was built in 1955. So then I think that's just how those pieces interact is an important conversation for the council to have.
Yes. So where you at on this? You got a little puzzle on your face here.
We did it.
You did it?
Did
Okay.
it. Just, thank you for spending 10 extra minutes with me. This is really helpful because knowing where we all stand and it really helps me know what to craft as a staff member, and 100% thank you all. This was great. Just so you know what our next steps are is, I'm gonna finish doing our survey. We're getting translated into Spanish, and we're going to, get that going, but we're gonna try to do more of a targeted survey since we did a large outreach with K-HOP and we got a lot of feedback on ADUs. We're gonna blast it all over social media, but then Chris and I are gonna do some tabling and then a more selected mailing of like places where ADUs might actually be built, and then people, and so trying to get some of that. It'll be a little more focused this time than K-HOP was. And then just the adoption timeline, and we've got lots of work to do before June 15th.
So, Councilman Larmer, you still have a question?
Oh, no, sorry.
You good? And Councilman Fincher, you good?
Yes.
Okay, good. This has been great. This has been fun.
Is that fun?
Yeah,
We
a
have
lot
fun?
of engagement
Okay.
back and forth, so I really
I
appreciate
still have a
it.
job? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you're not gonna get off that easy, Kaelene, okay? You have a lot of work to do. You just showed us that, so.
I mean, guys, I'm more than willing. I'm ready to go.
Yes. Hey, thanks a lot, Matt. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. This, like I said, it's been fun, and we enjoyed you asking for our inputs and look forward to as we move forward. Okay? All right. Thanks, guys. This is it, and we are adjourned. Thank you.